Can you hear me, everybody? My name is Matthias Sohn. I'm working for Eclipse. I'm a contributor to EGit, and I'm coordinating also JGit, and I'm a member of the architecture council. Today, I want to show some of the features available in EGit. So what I'm covering is roughly what happened during the last year. So it's this list of releases starting from 4.1 up to 4.5, which is the most recent one, which we released end of September. I'll try to demo most of the stuff, but I also have some slides. The first one is the merge strategy extension point. This was already presented during last EclipseCon, but now it landed in Neon. So if you install Neon and also install EMF compare, you can do versioning on models in the way like modeling needs that. So models typically spread across multiple files, and there are some additional means necessary to ensure that those models don't break when you change version, for example. Michael Istria implemented a new project import wizard in Eclipse. This was now also integrated into EGit. So this project import wizard is now the default. When you say import projects from a Git repository, you get this, and it's smarter in detecting project types and stuff like that. Now we come to a central component of EGit, the staging view, which, as you know, shows the status and is automatically refreshed. So that's a main workhorse in EGit. So we did a couple of improvements there. So we better support non-workspace files. I will show that. You can now sort files by status. This helps because they have different commands on them. So depending on the status, you have a different list of commands. And if you want to do the same operation on multiple files, it helps if you can sort by status. We deprecated the commit dialog, so we now focus on staging view. You can still enable the commit dialog, but by default it's now off. And the staging view can now also change the layout automatically from horizontal to vertical. So let me show this in Eclipse. So I have I just do it in EGit. In EGit we have a number of projects in the same repository, and the root folder is not in any Eclipse project, and this was always a problem. So now let me just create some files in the root. And if you now refresh here, we see these files which are not in any Eclipse project, and you now get the full menu. So you can open the version, you can compare it, you can also ignore it, and you can delete it. This wasn't possible earlier, just because it wasn't visible in the resource model. So next one was, let me check, sorting. Let's now just modify some other file, which is already existing. Just change some comments here. And we choose the list presentation so that you see the problem. So we can now sort according to the status, and this then helps to do multi-selection and get the same command on all the files with the same status. We don't need these files anymore, so I throw them away. Next one is commit is now done using staging view always. So if we, let me do it on EGit. Just do this change again here. Touch another one. Just add a command here. And now if I select this project, for example, and say team commit, formerly I got the commit dialog. What I get now is that those files which have been selected and are modified are auto-staged. So they moved from the unstaged changes to the staged changes. And the focus moves to the commit message editor so that I can immediately type a commit message. If I'm using a small screen like a laptop, for example, or if I want to have more space for an editor, I can now just move the staging view on the side, and as soon as the height is larger than the width, then it will switch automatically to vertical layout. So you can also have it in the sidebar, for example, or move it over here and still see all the fields needed. I mean, on this resolution, it's still a bit small, but on a usual laptop resolution, this makes it now usable also if you put it aside. There's another improvement in the staging view which came in recently, so it's in the latest version. This improved the layout of the entries in the staging view when you have a lot of changes. So if you have many modified files, let me just reset this repository to some old commit so that I get a lot of changes. So I do a mixed reset. So now I have a lot of changes. And if I now switch to the compact tree representation, which is more, you get a better overview if you have large changes. And now if you now start moving stuff around, the focus will behave more natural. Earlier it was always flipping back to the first entry, and if you have a long list, you always had to scroll back, which was pretty horrible. This is a nice contribution we got. Now let's go on to the next. So we saw all this. In the history view, we had some improvements. So we now the history view is now smarter when you're doing operations with branches. It will auto-select a local branch, which is not the current one. So let me show this. So for example, if you want to now check out master, earlier you always had to first start the command and then select the branch you want. And now the local branch is always pre-selected. If you want to delete a branch, it's the same. Hello. Doesn't work anymore. So it will pre-select the local branch because that's typically what you want to delete. Another nice improvement we got in history view is a new search widget. We earlier had this ugly search bar. Now you can just press Command F or Control F on Windows, and you will get this search widget. It behaves in a similar way like the old one. So it on the fly starts searching the history. And here you can step from one hit to the other, and here you can select which fields you want to search. As of now, we only can search metadata, so we don't yet have pickaxe so that you can also search source changes. This would be another nice feature, which we don't yet have. We did a lot of usability improvements. So we now also have a dirty decorator in the repositories view. So if you have any modifications in the repository, you immediately see that on the repositories view. Most of the Git actions are now also enabled on working set. So if you have all projects in the working set come from the same repository, you can do also the actions on the working set. You can now consistently configure the date format. Formerly, it was only configurable in some of the views. Now you can configure it across EGit, and you also get more available date formats. And you can now also view stashes in the commit viewer so that you can see what's the content of a stash. So let's show that. So if we take this project, change something, then you see you get the dirty decorator on the project on the repository. Earlier we only showed it in the resource tree. Here I don't have working sets, but in the other. So if I want to, I can now. I mean, all these projects belong to the same repository. So I now also have the full team menu. So I can, for example, run commit from here or reset. Let's try that. So we can reset to master, for example. No, I don't want this because this would change the version I'm running here. Okay, date format. There's a new preference for that. So now you get all of the Git predefined date formats you can choose, and there are some additional ones. For example, you can use relative date format. This is easier to read. And then you see here you get relative dates. If we do a blame here, for example, and you also get it here in, if we open this commit, for example, this also shows now a relative date. This wasn't consistent earlier. Viewing stashes. I have an example here in this one. Let me reset this. So a stash is a good way to put aside a change you currently don't want to look into, and you're not yet decided if you want to create a commit out of it, so you can just put it aside and take it back later. I did that with one change. So let me check out the master here. And here I have a stash. And if I want to see the content, I can just double-click this or use a menu, open in commit viewer. And now here I see this in the commit viewer. Stash in general can have 2 commits because you may have some unstaged changes and some staged changes, and these are stored in 2 different commits, which the stash refers to. So now you see here we have the changes which were unstaged when creating the stash, and these are the changes which were already staged. You can also see the diff for each of them. Just double-click on that. And if you want to apply the stash, just press this little button here. Okay, now we have a conflict. Bad luck. But we can now see in the staging view that what was in the unstaged changes in the stash is now was brought back into the working tree. Since the stash was created on a different base version, we now have a conflict which needs to be resolved. I won't do that now because it takes too much time, but it works in the same way like you know it. So I will reset this again. Okay, we had all this. We also improved the Gerrit integration a lot. So when you now clone a repository from Gerrit, EGit will automatically detect this is Gerrit and will configure it automatically so that you get the Gerrit menus. Also, when you download a change from Gerrit, you don't have to manually fill out the wizard. If you copied the URL of a change from Gerrit, it's autofilling the wizard already. And if you commit and push, so you can commit and push in one step from the staging view, this will now open the push to Gerrit wizard because many users were confused what this command will do, because it depends on how your configuration, or it depended on how the configuration of the remotes was. And now we explicitly show the push to Gerrit wizard, or we show the push branch wizard, depending if the repository was configured for Gerrit or not. And you can now also set a topic on when you push a change for review. So you can use topics to group changes in Gerrit so that you can, for example, query for them. So let's look at this. I have a local Gerrit server running. So we just take one repository I anyway need in a later demo. So just copy this one. You see it also contains the native git command. This doesn't disturb, so it will EGit will extract the part which is relevant. So we can clone this, put it somewhere. And now you see EGit automatically detected this is coming from a Gerrit server. So it enabled the Gerrit functionality, so you get all the Gerrit menus here. Okay, now we could try to download a change. Let's see if I have a change on this server. They're all merged already. Just to demonstrate how this works. So I can now just run fetch from Gerrit, and it will automatically populate the wizard because it detected that this is a Gerrit URL, which is in the clipboard. So when we're doing a change, let's go back to the other project, just do some dummy change here to save time. Now I want to commit and push, so I say command change, whatever. If I now, you already see the Gerrit icon on this, so you get aware that EGit knows that this is about Gerrit, so it will push for review. And now you will get the same push to Gerrit dialog you get when you run push from the repositories view. And the other thing I didn't show now. So I committed this, but I didn't push. So let me push. So here I can set a topic. So I can say EclipseCon, for example. And I push it as a draft, so I can delete it on the server. If I now look at the open changes, I can now see here the topic, and there's also a query string in Gerrit so that I can search for changes which have the same topic. So if you have 20 changes for a new feature, you can set the topic, and then it's easy to find those changes in Gerrit. There were quite some more improvements. So we heavily improved the support for submodules and nested repositories. Earlier, you could only use submodules if for each submodule you have a separate Eclipse project. This was really nasty. So I mean, you don't want to just introduce Eclipse projects because EGit needs them. So now this works without the need to have a project on each submodule. You can now configure pull options. So there, if you run a pull, it will first fetch updates from the server, and then it will either merge or rebase, and you can choose which one you want, and you can also tweak the configuration. There's also a configuration which says that this rebase, if you do rebase, it should preserve merge commits. I can also show that. We enhanced the check for running launches so that it checks if some code is running on the code you are changing. When you do, for example, a checkout, you get a warning do you really want to change the source code, for example, by checking out another branch if something is running. And now we check this for all commands which change the working tree. For example, reset. Since recently we have AutoGC like native Git, so if you run a command which creates typically many objects like fetch, because you get many objects from the server, then JGit will check if you have many loose objects, which makes the repository slower because it has to read a lot of files. It will automatically start a GC. So it's exactly the same algorithm like used in native Git. So you don't need to do this manually anymore. And for contributors, we now have an setup. So if you want to contribute something to EGit or JGit, you just check out the contributor guide. It takes a few minutes, so the main time is needed to download the Eclipse installation. And if you do it repeatedly, will cache what you downloaded earlier, so next time it's much faster. We got some more hooks. So the pre-push hook is now supported. This is required for the LFS feature I will talk about later. And the post-commit hook is now supported. This took us a long time to get support for Git attributes. This is now in since 4.3. This was the most wanted JGit bug, so there were more than 100 votes on this enhancement request. So you now can use filter attributes. Those are used by LFS extension for Git. You can use text attributes, end-of-line attributes, and macros. There are some more which are not yet supported, but they are not so frequently used. Okay, now let's talk about large file storage extension. In the client, we integrated the Git LFS extension in 4.2, and we are currently working on a built-in JGit LFS extension so that you don't need the LFS extension anymore outside of Eclipse, which makes the setup more complex. And for us, the reason to implement that is that the LFS extension internally uses native Git, and we can't ship native Git to customers because it's GPL licensed, and our lawyers don't like that. So we are implementing this extension now in JGit so that in the end you can run LFS without any extra stuff. On the server side, we did a basic LFS server implementation in JGit, so there are two storages you can choose from. You can either use a file system that's very easy to set up, but doesn't scale so good because you have to buy new disks if you run out of disk space. And I mean, it's about storing large files, so this can happen too. And we did an implementation for Amazon S3, so you have a scalable object store to store those objects. And we integrated this basics LFS server into Gerrit. So this is a new Gerrit plugin called LFS. This has both a storage implementation, so you can configure which one to use for which project. Now, why this LFS extension? The main reason is that versioning large binaries in Git simply doesn't really work well. So all the big hosters providing public Git hosting like GitHub or Atlassian or all the others, their main support load came always from guys storing binaries big binaries in Git, which causes all kinds of problems. The main reason is that binaries can't be packed efficiently because the pack algorithms mainly work perfectly well on text, but not on binaries. So the repositories are growing very quickly, so all the Git operations are getting expensive. And of course, you have to transfer all the data when you do a clone. This is the main impact. And this also increases the load on the Git server. Now, how does this work? So you have, with native Git, you have native Git, and you have an extension. This is implemented in Go. This was done by Atlassian and GitHub jointly, so it's open source. And looking at the local Git storage, you have the usual .git folder, which contains the Git objects, and there's now a new folder called LFS /objects, which contains the LFS objects. So the big binary objects get stored separately. And then you need a server. Of course, you need a Git server for the Git objects, and you need an LFS server to store the big objects on the server. Now you need to do some little configuration, so you have to configure Git attributes. This specifies that PDF files have to be treated by the LFS filter in the end. Git filter is a standard extension mechanism in Git, which we now integrated into JGit so that you can also use it from EGit. And then you also need to define which filters, what this filter LFS means. This is I defined in my user home Git config so that I can use it on all projects. You can also do it on your local configuration. So this defines the clean filter, which is used when you add a file to the index. And this much filter is for the opposite. So it just defines the command which needs to run for that. And this is calling the extension. So the LFS clean filter intercepts the add command, and the smudge filter intercepts the checkout command. You will see later why. Now what happens if you add a binary file is basically the clean filter will take the content of the binary file and put it in the LFS store, and it will generate a metadata file which is put into the Git history. And this mainly contains the SHA-256 of the file content. And it also has the size so that it can show progress. Now you can create a commit afterwards. And now if you push to your server, first the pre-push hook, which is installed by LFS extension, will upload the LFS objects which aren't yet present on the server. So the big object is sent first. And then the usual Git transport pushes the Git objects to the server. And the opposite direction shows where the gain comes from. So if you clone a repository, you only get the Git objects. You don't get the LFS, the large objects. They reside still on the server only. And only when you check out a certain version, then the LFS much filter will run during checkout. And this will then again call the LFS extension to download the big object used in that version you're checking out to the file system. So effectively, you are deferring download of the big objects until you know which version you need. That's the main gain you get from the LFS extension. Now let me do a short demo. So most of the stuff we can now do in JGit. So there's an additional configuration which tells Git, I want to use JGit, so EGit knows it doesn't have to call the external extension. The only part which is still missing is the pre-push hook. This isn't yet implemented in JGit, so I run a mix of both. Otherwise, I can't show the full cycle. So I already cloned this repository. It's this test repository. It currently only I can also import that, so you will see the contained files. It's a very simple one. Contains only one text file, and it already has the attributes we need. Let me see. This is filtered out. So we have this Git attributes definition. So it says if you add a PDF file, it should be stored in LFS. One more step I have to do, because I freshly cloned that, I have to put the pre-push hook from the native Git LFS extension into the hooks folder, otherwise this can't run. Another thing you need to do as long as you use the external extension is that you have to run Eclipse from an environment which has LFS on the path, otherwise it can't find it, so it won't work. So I started Eclipse from a terminal to get this. If you start it from the desktop, it doesn't work, at least on a Mac. Now we can just add a PDF. So I just take this presentation I'm showing today and move it in this repository. Maybe I should better take a copy, otherwise I cannot continue, maybe, I don't know. So I just paste it here. I can also show you what is, let me go to the, so this is the place where I have stored this. So this is the content of the Git repository folder. So there's no LFS yet, just that you see it, that I'm not cheating. And if you're now, I have to refresh here because I added the file externally, so Eclipse didn't notice. And if I now run add to index, I will also show you that we really use JGit here. I run this in the debugger so that we see that we end up in the JGit implementation. So if we say add to index, you see we end up in the clean filter in JGit. So I stop the debugging now, just for proof. So we have staged that, and the effect is that this object doesn't end up in the Git objects. So there's a new folder called LFS in the .git folder. And if we look at the content, you see there's one object stored, and this is the hash of the SHA-256 of the file content. You can also look at the size, if that's reasonable. So it's some 3.7 megabytes. And now we can commit this into the repository. This will just create a commit on top, so it doesn't change anything else. And then I can push that to the server. And this now first runs the pre-push hook using native Git LFS extension. We can also have a look at the server side. So this is the site folder of Gerrit. And we now go into the folder containing the server-side repository. So this is stored in this LFS folder. So it's test.git, and if you now just check the size, oh, this guy is only 80K, so it doesn't contain this 3.7 megabyte. And now I configured this Gerrit server to store the LFS objects inside this folder. So you see that's again the same object like we saw earlier. So it's now has been pushed by the LFS pre-push hook. Now we can accept this change just to make this cycle, to finish this cycle. So I will just accept this change. I can also show that Gerrit isn't yet aware of that this is an LFS object. So if you look at the change, you only see this metadata file describing what is stored in the LFS storage. So Gerrit doesn't show the file, but only the metadata which is stored in Git. And if I now accept this, submit the change, I can just do another clone to show that we can also download this. I'm running out of time. So just another repository in my workspace. And you see here, if you look into the working tree, I can't import the same project twice, but I can open it from here and you see it's the PDF, so it worked. So I showed the full round trip. So that's it. I think I have to skip the rest of my presentation. I just had too many topics. Are there any questions, comments? I didn't understand. Can you speak up? Yes? Yes? It's calling a REST API, providing the Gerrit version, and servers which are not Gerrit don't know this API. Pretty simple. And the same is done if you clone via SSH. There's an SSH command to get the server version. And if it's not Gerrit, it simply doesn't understand, and there's only an error or not found.
Does that happen in JGit or in EGit?
That's in EGit. And we have another hack, so we have the Eclipse Gerrit server is hard-coded. So we don't send too many requests to the Gerrit server at Eclipse. Yes?
About the backend server for LFS, is that a simple HTTP server?
That's the LFS plugin in Gerrit is running in the servlet container provided by Gerrit is running in, so you can run Gerrit either with the embedded Jetty, like you also run Jenkins. You can also deploy it in Tomcat if you want. And the backend for the LFS storage depends on the storage type you have chosen. So if you choose S3, the backend is S3. So you only talk to the Gerrit server in order to get the URL where you can upload the big object. And in case of S3, you get a pre-authenticated URL. So the Gerrit server will generate an authentication string which you can send to S3, so you get authenticated. So you don't need credentials for S3. Only the Gerrit server needs to know the access codes for the S3 bucket you're using. And you can also configure for different projects in Gerrit. You can have different backends, so you can choose to have different buckets for different folders in a repository hierarchy, for example. Maybe you want to split that repositories owned by a certain group are in a different bucket than the others. Any more questions? Okay then, thank you.